Peter Pardini, the director. Give a nice round of applause for Peter Pardini. The cinematographer, John Honoré. Give a nice round of applause, John Honoré. And Tim Jessup, the sound mixer from right here in Sedona, in Chicago's own studio that's right here in Sedona, ladies and gentlemen. Come on up, guys. And then please welcome some of the founding members of Chicago. Lee Buckname, long-forthcoming, and Jimmy Pankell. I think Jimmy's coming up too. There he is, right there.
We actually had fun with a lot of the archival footage, especially with Tim with the sound. We would hear, especially with the 5.1 that we had, we tried to make it sound like, with all the old recordings of concerts, to sound like you were in the room. So he could maybe explain a little bit about how he achieved that sound when he had, low quality archival footage to deal with.
Sure. Well, a lot of that audio from the archival stuff came to us in mono format, first of all. And some of it was pretty noisy and hums and things like that. And so the first thing we had to do was just clean it all up, take out all that noise. And then by routing it to the surround speakers through various digital delays and things, we could actually create the size of the space that would emulate what it was that we were seeing, like the scene with Janis Joplin, for instance, in that club early on. I wanted it to feel like you were right in that club. I think we achieved it.
And Tim pointed out that the movie inadvertently kind of shows the history of recorded music. Maybe you can say something about that. I thought that was interesting.
Well, over 50 years, you hear different eras in sound recording throughout the entire length of the film. And the band just took on different characters as the means of recording changed. And, so you hear these different periods. If you really listen, for instance, the Caribou Ranch period has a very distinctive sound to it, as studio does. And if you think a minute about, for instance, all the old Motown records that came out, they all sounded the same. They had the same kind of character, and that's because they were all recorded at Hitsville in that same room. And literally the same musicians. the funk artists. And so the recordings that came out of Caribou Ranch had a very distinctive sound to them, very rich and full, and it really translated well in film, I thought, especially in the theater. It just sounded wonderful. And then you get into the 1980s, and you've got, David Foster with Humberto Gatica mixing on an SSL, and the SSL consoles that came out in the early 80s had a completely different kind of muscular sound to them, and you hear those power ballads, and it sounds larger than life, and that's, again, the technology changing. So, and then you get to the live stuff at the end, and that's all digital, and we mixed all that here in Sedona, all the current band stuff you hear. And we use tools that emulate the old analog tube and transistor circuitry to warm it up and thicken it up and have it blend with the older material.
You can carry the whole thing right under your arm.
Yeah, you can put it under your arm.
Right under your arm.
And the band has a portable system that matches what we have here in Sedona that they travel with. And so now they can record albums literally as they're traveling. They don't have to stop and take 6 months off and go into the studio. In fact, nobody can do that anymore just because of the way the economies have changed in the music business. So their last album came out, the new Chicago album. It's called Now, Chicago 36. You might want to check it out. It's amazing. That was recorded entirely on the road as they were traveling on the system.
This film, I'm very proud to say this film has been named the best of the fest, and I think a great big part of why you enjoyed this film so much is the sound design and post-production mixing of Tim Jessup. Welcome to Sedona, and congratulations. So, like I said, this is definitely the soundtrack to our lives. This was an incredible piece of work. What I love so much is that the music sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
And that's your work. Oh my gosh.
Tim Jessup, everybody.
Yeah, really.
We've actually been working here in Sedona for about 6 years now, since Lee Lockney moved here in 2010. And I started working with them on a picture that they had filmed in Chicago, called Chicago in Chicago with the Doobie Brothers. And eventually we ended up building a studio to actually do all of the audio production here, whether for film or for some of the new albums that have come out. And we mixed this whole soundtrack right here in Sedona, so this is homegrown. Not only the soundtrack to the movie, but a lot of the individual music pieces in the movie, all the current band scenes that you see, and the drum solo interests and all of that was done right here in our little studio.
Yeah, well.
And then when Tim and I started mixing it, I had laid all the music in, most of the sound effects, but he has a library of sound effects, and I said, I don't want this to just be Chicago's greatest hits. So, they had a bunch of hits in the 70s, and then good luck, Chicago. I wanted it to be a story about brothers, and I think Tim can talk about how we achieved that with the sound design.
Well, a big part of this film is the music itself. Not only does it tell the band story, but it tells all of our stories as well, because we all relate to it so much. But woven through the picture is really kind of a history of music, sound recording, because the sound changes so radically, from the very beginnings and through the early 70s, and we get into the mid 70s and the Caribou Ranch days, and there's a whole other sound, and then there's the 80s and so forth. And so we wanted the music to translate impeccably, and we did some things in the mix to enable it to translate in a movie theater the same way that it would sound if you were in the control room of one of these vintage studios that they were recording in, and you were listening to a playback through the big Westlake monitors and so forth. So the audiences for this film are experiencing this music in a way that they really never had the opportunity to experience it before. Well, I've kind of gone full circle in my career, because I started out in music as a music mixer, and was very fortunate early on to be working as a staff engineer at some of the big studios in Los Angeles. Going back to the late 70s, early 80s, working, 25 years old, working with artists like Quincy Jones, and worked with Christopher Cross on Arthur's theme, and
Sailing? Did you work on Sailing?
I worked on Arthur's theme.
Arthur's theme, okay.
Which got an Academy Award actually
It did.
that year for the film. Many other artists, R&B artists like Gladys Knight, and the Temptations, and Isley Brothers, and the Gap Band, and on and on. Rock artists, so on and so forth. And then later on, I got into post-sound. I fell in love with the art of sound to picture. And I spent many years working with picture, and I built a studio in Phoenix where I did a lot of work, both with film companies like Fox Animation and Disney and so forth, as well as advertising agencies. And so I was fully immersed in sound design for many years, and built this huge library of sound effects and production music and so forth. But eventually, full circle, all the way back around, now doing music again for Chicago, and it's just really wonderful at this point in my life, and especially at this time in our history as a country and a species, given what I hear on the radio these days, to actually be working with what I consider real music. It's a rarity, and so I consider myself very fortunate.
So this is a film we give out our Best of Fest award. And this is the film that really represents an incredible year for us and what it's done for us. And I think without question, all of us can agree, we had our biggest festival this year, and this was a very top-rated film audience-wise and by all of us. Now more than ever, the history of Chicago.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peter, and your crew for doing such a magnificent job. First film out of the gate. Unbelievable. Thank you, Peter. That's quite a future in front of him as a filmmaker. I want to thank Patrick for believing in us and watching this thing evolve literally since last year. Actually, when I walked up to Patrick and said, "Hey, we're working on a movie about Chicago. What do you think? You might be interested?" And look at all that's transpired. Huge thank to Lee Loughnane for believing in me as a sound designer and the engineer for all of their music. I gotta say, it's just amazing to me, and I feel so blessed in 2016 to have the opportunity to actually work on real music. Thank you. I want to thank my partner Nina for putting up with the countless nights that I wasn't around because I tend to work till 6 o'clock in the morning or later. And lastly, I'd like to thank my dad, who I lost this past year. And I'd like to thank him because when I was a young toddler of about 3 years old, he had joined the Audio Society in the small town I grew up in upstate New York. And from the time I was just this tall, I just had an appreciation for great sound and the technology behind it. And my dad really got me started on that path. And here I am, still going all these years later. Thank you to the board of directors, to the film festival in general, for having this wonderful, wonderful event and giving us the opportunity to get Chicago here to entertain all of you guys. And I hope we can do something equally as magnificent next year.
Yes.